The power of reverse psychology. How to get anyone to do anything by telling them the opposite. Introduction. The invisible force that controls human behavior. There's a moment most people never notice. It happens in conversations, in relationships, in boardrooms and bedrooms, and arguments that seem to go nowhere. It's the moment when someone, without raising their voice, without begging, without force, gets exactly what they want. And the other person, they walk away thinking it was their own idea. That moment is not luck. It's not charm. It's not manipulation in the way you might imagine, shadowy and sinister, practiced by villains in movies. It's something far more elegant and far more common than you think. It's reverse psychology. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Why people always want what they can't have. Let's start with something you already know in your gut. Tell a child not to touch something, a red button, a closed box, a jar on the top shelf, and watch what happens. Their eyes lock onto it. Their hands drift toward it. Their mind, previously indifferent, becomes consumed by one thought. What's in there? Why can't I have it? Now here's what most people get wrong. They think this is a childhood thing, something we grow out of. We don't. The adult version looks different, but the wiring is identical. Tell someone a book is banned. Watch sales triple overnight. Tell someone they probably wouldn't be interested in something. Watch them lean forward. Tell someone a relationship is too complicated for them. Watch them fight to prove you wrong. This is not weakness. This is not stupidity. This is the human brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect the one thing it values above almost everything else. Freedom. The moment we sense that our freedom to choose is being threatened, a primal alarm goes off deep in the brain. Psychologists call it reactance. You can call it the engine that drives almost every decision people make when they feel pushed. Why resistance is the most predictable human reaction. Here's the uncomfortable truth about influence. Direct pressure almost never works. Think about the last time someone really tried to convince you of something. A salesperson, a partner during an argument, a boss pushing an idea you didn't believe in. The harder they pushed, the more you pulled back, didn't you? That's not stubbornness. That's physics applied to the human mind. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Push on a person's will, and their will pushes back. It's automatic. It's unconscious. And most people spend their entire lives trying to overcome this force head-on and wondering why they keep failing. The people who truly understand influence don't fight this force. They use it. How reverse psychology exploits the brain's need for autonomy. Reverse psychology works because it goes with human nature, not against it. Instead of pushing, it steps back. Instead of demanding, it withdraws. Instead of saying, "You must," it says, "You probably can't," and then watches the other person spend enormous energy proving that they absolutely can. It sounds simple, and in a way it is. But like all powerful things, simplicity hides depth. Used clumsily, reverse psychology is obvious, insulting, and backfires immediately. Used with precision, with the right timing, the right framing, the right understanding of the person in front of you, it is nearly invisible and nearly irresistible. This book will teach you both sides. You'll learn how to use these principles in your relationships, your career, your negotiations, and your daily conversations. But you'll also learn how to recognize when these techniques are being used on you, so that your choices remain your own. Because here's the truth that most books on influence don't tell you. Knowledge is the only real immunity. The moment you understand why you want something forbidden, why you argue back when pushed, why you feel ownership over ideas you didn't originate, you gain a layer of protection that most people never develop. And simultaneously, you gain a tool that most people never master. In the chapters ahead, you'll meet real people in real situations. Parents, salespeople, lovers, leaders, navigating the invisible tug-of-war that underlies almost every human interaction. You'll see exactly where things go right, where they go wrong, and how a single shift in approach changes everything. By the time you finish this book, you'll never look at a conversation the same way again. That's not a promise. That's just what happens when you finally see what was always there. Chapter 1. The Forbidden Fruit Effect. Why people want what you tell them they can't have. There's a story that's older than any psychology textbook. A garden. 2 people. 1 rule. Don't touch that tree. And of all the things in that garden, everything available, everything permitted, everything abundant and free, the one thing they couldn't stop thinking about was the one thing they were told to leave alone. You know how the story ends. We've been calling it original sin for thousands of years. Psychologists have a different name for it. But the mechanism is exactly the same, and it's running in the background of your mind right now, whether you realize it or not. The psychology of reactance, when no means needed now. In 1966, a psychologist named Jack Brem proposed something that, at first glance, sounds almost too simple to be revolutionary. He said, when people feel that their freedom to choose something is being taken away, they don't just accept it. They want that thing more, sometimes desperately more, and they'll work, consciously or unconsciously, to get it back. He called this psychological reactance. Think of it as an internal alarm system. The moment someone or something threatens your sense of autonomy, a signal fires in your brain. Wait, who said you get to decide what I can and can't have? And suddenly, an option you were completely indifferent to becomes the only option that matters. This isn't irrational. From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes perfect sense. An animal that passively accepts the loss of resources doesn't survive long. The drive to resist restriction, to reclaim choice, to push back against limits, that's not a flaw in human wiring. It's one of its oldest features. The problem, or the opportunity, depending on which side of the equation you're on, is that this system doesn't distinguish between restrictions that matter and restrictions that don't. It fires just as powerfully when someone tells you a product is almost sold out as it does when something genuinely important is at stake. Your brain doesn't ask, is this worth wanting? It asks, can I still have it? The experiment that changed everything. Let's make this concrete. Researchers once conducted a study involving 2 groups of people and a simple consumer product, a laundry detergent. Stay with me. This gets interesting. One group was told the detergent was freely available and they could buy as much as they liked. The other group was told it was rationed. Each household could only purchase a limited amount. Same product, same price, same everything. The ration group didn't just want it more. They evaluated it as better, higher quality, more effective, more desirable. Nothing about the detergent changed. Everything about the restriction changed how people perceived it. Now, take that principle out of the detergent aisle and into your life, into your relationships, your negotiations, the conversations where you need someone to lean in instead of pull away. The principle travels perfectly. Real life, the parent, the phone, and the power struggle. Imagine a mother. Her teenage son has developed an intense interest in a particular group of friends she doesn't trust. Every evening, he's glued to his phone, texting them, making plans, drifting further into their orbit. She does what most parents do. She pushes back, sets rules, says those kids are trouble, limits his time with them. And what happens? He wants them more. He sneaks. He lies. He romanticizes them. Because now they're not just friends. They're forbidden. And forbidden things glow in the dark of the teenage mind like nothing else can. Now imagine a different approach. She says almost nothing. She stops fighting. She even, carefully, strategically, acts slightly unimpressed. Oh, those guys. Sure, have them over. Whatever you want. She makes the friends feel ordinary, available, unremarkable. Within weeks, the intensity fades. Not because the friends changed, because the restriction that made them magnetic disappeared. The forbidden fruit stopped being forbidden. And without that charge, it was just fruit. How to use the forbidden fruit effect, step by step. This is where we get practical, because understanding the psychology is only half the work. The other half is knowing exactly how to apply it. Step 1. Stop pushing toward. Start pulling away. Whatever you want someone to move toward, an idea, a product, a relationship, a decision, resist the urge to sell it directly. Direct promotion triggers resistance. Instead, create subtle distance. Act as though it may not be available, not suitable, or not something you expect them to be interested in. Step 2. Introduce scarcity, real or perceived. Scarcity doesn't have to be manufactured dishonestly. It can be as simple as being genuinely selective. I only share this with a few people. There's limited space. This opportunity isn't for everyone. These aren't lies, they're framings. And they trigger the reactant's response immediately. Step 3. Let them convince you. This is the most powerful move in the sequence. Once you've created distance and scarcity, stay slightly hesitant. Don't cave immediately when they show interest. Let them make the case. Let them pursue. The moment someone is arguing for something, they've crossed from passive interest into active desire. And active desire is extraordinarily difficult to walk back. Step 4. Give them the choice, explicitly. Reactance fades when people feel controlled. It intensifies when they feel free. Paradoxically, one of the best ways to get someone to choose what you want is to genuinely give them the option not to. You don't have to, only if it feels right for you. No pressure either way. These phrases don't weaken your position. They remove the resistance that would otherwise block it. Warning: when the forbidden fruit effect is used on you. Now flip the lens. You're in a store and the salesperson mentions, almost casually, that there are only 2 units left. You feel a subtle urgency that wasn't there 30 seconds ago. You're dating someone who is suddenly slightly less available, slightly harder to read, and you find yourself thinking about them more, not less. You're in a negotiation and the other party acts as though they're not sure the deal is right for you, and you feel an irrational need to prove that it is. These are not coincidences. These are triggers. How to protect yourself. Ask one question the moment you feel sudden urgency around something that didn't interest you moments before. Did something about this actually change? Or did something about my access to it change? That single question cuts through almost everything. Because if the answer is only the access changed, you're experiencing reactance, not genuine desire. And you get to choose whether to act on it. Awareness doesn't make you immune to the forbidden fruit effect, but it slows it down just enough for reason to catch up. And in that gap between impulse and decision, that's where your real power lives. Chapter 2. Agree to win. How giving people the opposite of a fight disarms them completely. Picture a man standing at the edge of an argument he's already lost. He doesn't know it yet. He's still talking, voice rising, jaw tight, absolutely convinced that if he just explains his position one more time, clearly enough, loudly enough, the other person will finally understand. They won't. Not because he's wrong, not because the other person is unreasonable, but because of something so fundamental to human psychology that most people walk past it every single day without ever noticing it. The moment an argument begins, it stops being about facts. It becomes about ego. And ego doesn't yield to logic. It yields to something far more unexpected. Why arguing makes resistance stronger. Here's what happens inside the brain during a disagreement. The second someone feels attacked, intellectually, emotionally, ideologically, the rational, thinking part of the brain begins to step aside. What takes over is older, faster, and far less interested in nuance. The brain shifts into a mode designed for one thing: survival of the self. Suddenly, the other person isn't a colleague with a different opinion. They're a threat. And when facing a threat, the brain doesn't evaluate arguments. It fortifies its position. It searches for flaws in your logic, not wisdom in it. It prepares a counterattack. This is why the harder you push in an argument, the harder the other person pushes back. You're not failing to convince them. You're actively making them more convinced they're right. Every point you score feels to them like an attack that must be defended. Every piece of evidence you present is a weapon to be deflected. You can be completely correct and still lose. In fact, being correct often makes it worse. The person who truly understands influence knows this. And instead of pushing harder, they do something that seems, on the surface, like surrender. They agree. The power of strategic agreement. Let's be precise about what strategic agreement is and what it isn't. It is not pretending to believe something you don't. It is not weakness, capitulation, or giving up ground that matters. It is not dishonesty dressed up as technique. It is the art of finding the part of someone's position that is true and leading with that, loudly and generously, before you say anything else. Because here's what happens when you genuinely agree with someone who expects a fight. Their armor falls off. They prepared for resistance. They loaded their arguments, sharpened their responses, braced for impact. And then you walked in and said, sincerely, "You know what? You're absolutely right about that." The relief is almost physical. The defensiveness drains. And in its place, something far more useful appears: openness. A person who feels heard is infinitely more persuadable than a person who feels attacked. This is not a manipulation trick. It is the most basic law of human communication, and almost nobody follows it consistently. Real life. The negotiation that shouldn't have worked. Consider a sales manager. Let's call her Diana, dealing with a client who is furious. The client, Marcus, believes he was overcharged on his last contract. He comes into the meeting already hostile, armed with numbers, ready for a fight. His opening line is essentially an accusation. The old Diana, the one who hadn't yet learned this lesson, would have defended the pricing immediately, explained the value, justified the numbers, matched his energy, at least slightly, with a professional form of resistance. The new Diana does something different. She listens completely. She doesn't interrupt. And when Marcus finishes, she says, "You're right. Looking at what you received versus what you paid, I completely understand why this feels wrong. If I were in your position, I'd be frustrated too." Silence. Marcus had more arguments ready. He didn't need them now. The fight he came for wasn't there. And in that silence, Diana continued, calmly, without urgency, to explain the full picture. The context, the value he may have missed, the path forward. Marcus left that meeting not only satisfied, but with an expanded contract. Not because Diana was clever, because she was disarming. She gave him what he actually came for, to be understood, before she asked for anything in return. The psychology behind why this works. When we feel understood, a very specific thing happens neurologically. Our threat response quiets down. The brain stops allocating resources to defense and begins, tentatively, then fully, to engage its higher reasoning. We become capable of nuance again, of reconsidering, of updating our position without feeling like we've been defeated. This is the difference between changing your mind and being proven wrong. They can involve identical information, but one feels like growth and the other feels like humiliation. Strategic agreement creates the conditions for the first. Direct confrontation almost always produces the second. There's also something else at play, something subtler. When you agree with someone, you implicitly grant them status. You signal, "I take your perspective seriously enough to acknowledge its validity." Most people are starved for this kind of recognition. When they receive it unexpectedly, they become, almost without exception, far more willing to extend the same generosity back. It becomes a different kind of negotiation, not adversarial, collaborative. And in collaborative negotiations, you can guide the outcome far more effectively than in battles of will. How to use strategic agreement? Step by step. Step 1. Let them finish. Completely. This sounds obvious. Almost nobody does it. Most people spend the time another person is talking preparing their response. Don't. Listen until they have genuinely nothing left to say. The pause after they finish is not awkward. It's respect. And it's noticed. Step 2. Find the truth in their position and name it. There is almost always something valid in the other person's argument. Find it before you do anything else. Name it specifically, not vaguely. "You're kind of right" is useless. You're absolutely right that the timeline was unrealistic, and that put you in a difficult position is powerful. Specificity signals that you actually listened. Step 3. Agree with the emotion, not just the facts. People don't just want to be intellectually validated. They want their feeling to make sense. "I completely understand why that would be frustrating" is not the same as "I understand your point." One addresses the argument. The other addresses the person. Always do both. Step 4. Introduce your perspective as an addition, not a correction. Once the other person feels genuinely heard, shift the frame gently. Not, "But here's why you're wrong." Instead, "And here's something that might add to that picture." Or "What I'd add to that is." You're not contradicting them. You're building on the foundation they laid. This keeps their ego intact while moving the conversation forward. Step 5. Let them arrive at the conclusion. The most powerful version of this technique ends with the other person stating the position you wanted them to reach in their own words. Don't rush this. Ask questions. Given all that, what do you think makes the most sense? When they say the thing you wanted, resist every urge to say, "That's what I was trying to tell you." Just nod. Let them own it. Warning: when strategic agreement is used on you, you're in a heated conversation. You're ready to fight. And then the other person says something unexpected. They agree with you. Warmly. Specifically. They really seem to understand. You relax. Your defenses drop. And then, very gently, the conversation begins to move. How do you know if this is genuine empathy or strategic technique? Honestly, sometimes you don't. And that's not necessarily a problem. Even if someone's agreement is strategic, if they've genuinely acknowledged your perspective, you've still gained something real. But watch for this pattern. Agreement that comes too quickly, too completely, and is immediately followed by redirection. Genuine empathy sits with your experience for a moment. It doesn't rush to pivot. If someone agrees with everything you say in the first 30 seconds and is already guiding you somewhere new, slow down. Ask yourself, what are they moving me toward? And would I choose that direction on my own? The antidote isn't suspicion. It's awareness and pace. Take your time before making any decision that follows unexpected agreement. The discomfort of waiting is far smaller than the cost of being led somewhere you didn't intend to go. Agreement is not the opposite of strength. In the hands of someone who truly understands people, it is strength, redirected, refined, and devastatingly effective. The fighter charges forward. The master steps aside, borrows the force, and chooses where it lands. Chapter 3. The reverse: ask how to get favors, compliance, and cooperation without asking directly. There's a certain kind of person you've probably met. They never seem to need anything from you. They don't ask for favors, not directly, anyway. They don't push, don't pressure, don't follow up 3 times with increasingly desperate emails. And yet somehow, you find yourself doing things for them, helping them, going out of your way, even when nobody asked you to. Afterward, you're not entirely sure how it happened. That person isn't lucky. They're not unusually charming. They've simply understood something about human psychology that most people spend their entire lives accidentally working against. The moment you directly ask for something, you hand the other person all the power. They can say yes. They can say no. They can negotiate. And the entire interaction becomes transactional, with you positioned as the one who needs, and them positioned as the one who decides. The reverse ask changes that equation entirely. The psychology behind indirect requests. Human beings have a complicated relationship with being asked for things. On the surface, we like to help. Studies consistently show that people derive genuine satisfaction from doing favors. It activates reward pathways, strengthens social bonds, and reinforces our sense of ourselves as generous, capable people. But here's the friction. Nobody likes feeling obligated. The moment a request arrives directly, clearly labeled, undeniable, something shifts. The other person is no longer choosing to help. They're responding to a demand, however politely phrased. And choice, as we established in Chapter 1, is everything to the human brain. Remove someone's sense of choice, and you activate resistance. Even when they intended to help you, being asked can make them want to pull back. This is why the most effective requests often don't look like requests at all. They look like statements, like indifference, like withdrawal, like an offer of something bigger than what you actually want. How pushing people away makes them come closer. Consider what happens when something, or someone, becomes suddenly unavailable. We've already explored this with the forbidden fruit effect, but the reverse ask takes that principle and applies it specifically to the act of seeking help or cooperation. Imagine you want a colleague to review your work before a big presentation. The direct approach. Hey, would you have time to look this over? They're busy. They feel the obligation. There's a decent chance they'll say yes out of social pressure and do a half-hearted job, or say no and feel vaguely guilty about it. Now imagine the indirect approach. You mention, casually, that you're going to have to submit the report without a second pair of eyes because everyone seems slammed this week. You're not complaining. You're just noting it. And then you move on. There's a reasonable chance your colleague says, wait, I can take a quick look. And here's the critical difference. They offered. They chose. The favor comes with genuine engagement rather than reluctant compliance because it originated from their own sense of agency. You didn't ask. You created the conditions for them to offer. Real life. The raise that came without asking. Let's talk about James. James had been with his company for 3 years. He was good at his job, not flashy, but consistently excellent. He wanted a raise. He'd watch colleagues ask directly and get vague responses, promises that faded, uncomfortable conversations that changed nothing except the atmosphere. So, James tried something different. He didn't ask for a raise. Instead, over the course of 4 weeks, he made sure his manager was aware, without any pressure, of 3 things. A competing offer he declined because he valued his role here, the scope of a recent project that had expanded significantly beyond his original job description, and an offhand comment about a recruiter who had reached out that he hadn't responded to yet. None of these were manufactured. All of them were true. James simply chose to make them visible. At the end of the month, his manager initiated a compensation conversation. James didn't ask. His manager arrived at the conclusion that James deserved more. And because it was their conclusion, they championed it internally with real conviction. The raise was approved faster and at a higher amount than James would have dared request directly. Technique. Asking for more to get what you actually want. This is one of the most counterintuitive moves in the entire toolkit of influence, and one of the most reliably effective. It's called the door-in-the-face technique, and it works like this. You ask for something significantly larger than what you actually want. The other person declines, which they almost certainly will, because the request is genuinely excessive. You accept the rejection graciously, without pressure or guilt. Then you make your real, smaller request. The psychology here is layered. First, your smaller request now looks reasonable by comparison, almost modest. The frame is shifted. What might have seemed like a significant ask before now feels like a compromise, a middle ground. Second, and more powerfully, the other person feels a subtle but real sense of reciprocity. You conceded something. You scale back your request. Social norms around fairness create an almost automatic pressure for them to concede something in return. Saying no to your smaller request now would feel disproportionate, slightly unfair. So they say yes. Not because you tricked them, because you worked with how their brain naturally processes negotiation. How to use the reverse ask, step by step. Step 1. Never lead with a real request. Begin further back. Establish context, relationship, value, before any ask appears. People help those they feel connected to far more readily than strangers who appear only when they need something. Step 2. Make your situation visible without framing it as a request. State the problem, the gap, the challenge, clearly enough that the need is obvious, without attaching an explicit ask to it. I'm trying to figure out how to approach this without an industry contact is not a request, but anyone with an industry contact who hears that will consider whether to offer. This only works if you then genuinely step back. Don't hover. Don't look expectant. Let the silence do the work. Step 3. When using door in the face, make the large request genuinely large. The initial ask needs to be big enough that declining feels natural, not so outrageous that it damages your credibility. Ask for an hour when you need 20 minutes. Ask for a full partnership when you need a referral. Ask to borrow something significant when you need something small. The gap between the first ask and the second is where the technique lives. Step 4. Receive the no with complete grace. This part is non-negotiable. When they decline the large request, your response must be entirely without tension, disappointment, or subtle pressure. Completely understand. That's a lot to ask. The graciousness of your acceptance is what creates the social pressure for them to meet you halfway. Step 5. Make the real ask feel like a mutual solution. Don't pivot too quickly. Let a brief moment pass. Then frame the smaller request not as a fallback, but as an idea that just occurred to you. A more reasonable alternative that might work for both of you. Actually, what if we just gives them the sense that this solution is emerging organically, not that it was the plan all along. Real-life use cases. In dating, rather than asking someone out directly and putting them in the position of an immediate yes or no, mention something you're planning to do, a restaurant you want to try, an event that sounds interesting. Let them respond to the thing, not to the invitation. Interest tends to declare itself. In parenting, children, like all humans, resist direct commands. Clean your room triggers negotiation. I don't know how we're going to find your soccer cleats in all this, is an observation. It invites cooperation rather than demanding it. In sales, instead of asking for a sale, ask for something larger, a full audit, a long-term commitment, an enterprise package. When that's declined, the actual product you wanted to sell becomes the reasonable middle ground. Closing rates on that second ask are significantly higher than if it had been the first. In the workplace, instead of asking your manager to promote your idea, ask for their opinion on the problem your idea solves. Let them engage with the problem first. By the time you present the solution, they're already invested in solving it. They've thought about it. Now your idea feels like a shared endeavor, not a proposal they're evaluating from the outside. Warning: when a reverse ask is used on you, the signs are subtle, but they're there. Someone mentions a problem in your presence, a problem you happen to be positioned to solve, and then says nothing more. They don't ask. They just leave it there. Or someone makes a large, unreasonable request. You decline. They accept it easily. And then, before the conversation ends, there's a smaller ask that now feels almost impossible to refuse. How to protect yourself. With the first scenario, the visible problem, ask yourself honestly, did they come to me because I can help, or did they come to me to solve their problem? There's nothing wrong with being asked for help, but if you notice a pattern of someone regularly placing their needs in your field of vision without ever directly asking, you're allowed to make them ask directly. Do you need help with that? Puts the ball back in their court and gives you a clear choice. With the door in the face, pause before the second ask lands. When someone accepts your no with unusual grace and then immediately offers a smaller alternative, recognize the structure. Ask yourself, Would I have agreed to this second request if the first one had never been made? If yes, proceed. If you're not sure, slow down. A request can almost always wait 24 hours. Most of the urgency you feel in these moments is manufactured by the technique itself, not by reality. The reverse ask is ultimately about one thing: respect for the other person's psychology. Direct demands create resistance. Invisible requests create choice. And people who feel they're choosing, rather than complying, are not only more likely to say yes, but more likely to follow through, to do it well, and to feel good about it afterward. That's not manipulation. That's just understanding what people actually need in order to give you what you want. Chapter 4. Planting Seeds. How to make people think your idea was theirs all along. There's a particular kind of genius that goes completely unrecognized. Not the genius of the person standing at the front of the room, presenting the brilliant idea everyone's applauding, but the genius of the person sitting quietly to the side. The one who, 3 conversations ago, asked a few carefully chosen questions, made one offhand observation, mentioned something almost in passing. The one who planted the seed, and then stepped back and watched it grow into someone else's idea. This is the most sophisticated form of influence in existence. Not because it requires the most force, but because it requires the least. No persuasion, no argument, no pushing, just a precise understanding of how the human mind takes ownership of thoughts and the patience to let that process unfold naturally. By the end of this chapter, you'll never think about ideas, where they come from, who owns them, how they spread, the same way again. The ego and the ownership of ideas. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. When was the last time you changed your mind because someone told you to? Really think about it. Not a situation where new information genuinely shifted your understanding, but a situation where someone simply argued at you until you yielded. Where pressure, not insight, changed your position. It probably doesn't happen often. And when it does, it doesn't feel good. It feels like defeat. And defeated people don't become enthusiastic champions of the idea that beat them. They become quiet, resentful, waiting for the moment to revert. Now contrast that with the last time you had what felt like a genuine insight. A moment where something clicked, where you arrived at an understanding, you connected the dots, you saw the solution clearly. How'd that feel? Energizing, motivating, yours. And here's the thing about ideas: we feel we've discovered ourselves. We defend them. We act on them. We evangelize them. Not because someone told us to, but because they feel like an extension of our own intelligence, our own perception, our own identity. The person who understands this doesn't try to convince you of their idea. They create the conditions for you to discover it yourself. The psychology, why ownership changes everything. Psychologists call it the IKEA effect, the documented phenomenon where people assign significantly higher value to things they've had a hand in creating, even when the objective quality is identical to something made entirely by someone else. The name comes from the obvious. Furniture you assembled yourself, however imperfectly, feels more valuable than furniture that arrived pre-built. You put something into it. It's part yours now. Ideas work the same way, only more so. When a thought passes through your own mind, when you feel the cognitive effort of connecting it to your existing knowledge and experience, it becomes embedded differently than a thought that was handed to you preformed. It has your fingerprints on it, and anything with your fingerprints on it becomes worth protecting, worth pursuing, worth telling other people about. This is why the most effective leaders, negotiators, and communicators throughout history have shared one quiet skill. They were masterful at making other people feel like the smartest person in the room, without surrendering anything essential themselves. They led from behind the idea, and the idea carried them forward. Real life, the architect and the client. Consider a scenario that plays out in some version across almost every creative and consulting profession. An architect, let's call her Nora, is meeting with a new client. He's wealthy, opinionated, and absolutely certain he knows what he wants. A bold, modern structure with enormous glass walls and an open floor plan. Nora looks at the land. She knows the site faces west. She knows those glass walls will turn the house into a furnace every afternoon. She knows the open floor plan will create noise and privacy problems the client hasn't considered. The design he wants will make him miserable within a year of moving in. She could tell him this directly. She could present the counter-arguments, show him the data, explain why his vision is flawed. She could, but she's done that before, and she knows what happens. The client digs in, defends his vision, and either she builds something she knows is wrong, or she loses the project entirely. So instead, she asks questions. What time of day do you think you'll use the main living space most? He says evenings, mostly. And where do you see yourself at the end of a workday? Unwinding, or still energized? Unwinding, definitely. Interesting. Have you spent time in spaces that felt immediately calming versus ones where you had to work to relax? The conversation continues. She doesn't mention sunlight once. She doesn't mention the floor plan. She just asks and listens and occasionally says, "That's interesting. I wonder if that connects to..." By the end of the meeting, the client is talking enthusiastically about a revised vision. Warm materials. Consider privacy. A more intentional relationship between the structure and the land. He's excited. He came up with it. Nora is smiling. She guided every step. The art of leading questions. A leading question is not, as people sometimes assume, a manipulative trap. At its best, it's an invitation to think more deeply than you would have on your own. The difference between a leading question and a manipulative one lies entirely in intent. Are you opening someone's thinking or closing it toward a predetermined conclusion that serves only you? Used with integrity, leading questions are one of the most generous things you can offer another person. They make people feel genuinely thought about. Because good questions require the questioner to understand the other person's situation well enough to know which direction to lead their thinking. Here's how they work structurally. A standard question asks for information. What do you think of this plan? A leading question guides attention. What do you think would happen if we tried this plan in a market that was already saturated? The second question doesn't tell the person what to think, but it directs their thinking toward a specific consideration, one that, once engaged with, tends to lead naturally to a particular conclusion. The key is that the conclusion feels earned, because it was. You just chose the path. Subtle framing, the words that carry the weight. Beyond questions, there's another tool in the seed planter's kit. One so quiet that most people miss it entirely even when it's happening to them. Framing. The same reality, described with different words, produces entirely different emotional responses and conclusions. This isn't spin. It's the basic architecture of language. That words don't just describe the world. They shape how we experience it. Compare these two ways of presenting an identical situation. We could take the risk and expand into a new market. Versus, we could seize the opening before our competitors realize it's there. Same decision, same action, but one activates the fear of loss, and the other activates the thrill of opportunity. The person hearing the second version will approach the decision with an entirely different psychological posture than the person hearing the first. Seed planters choose their frames with care, not to deceive, but to illuminate the angle they want the other person to consider. Over the course of a conversation, these small word choices accumulate into a direction, and the person following that direction feels like they're navigating freely. How plant seeds, step by step. Step 1. Know exactly where you want to end up before the conversation begins. Seed planting is not improvisation. It requires knowing your destination clearly enough that you can reverse engineer the questions and observations that lead there. If you don't know where you're going, you can't lay the path. Step 2. Start with their world, not yours. Before any question, any observation, any subtle frame, spend real time understanding the other person's existing perspective, priorities, and concerns. The seed must be planted in their soil to grow in their mind. An insight that connects to nothing they already care about will be forgotten within the hour. Step 3. Ask questions that make them think one step further than they currently are, not leading them to your conclusion directly, but prompting a slightly deeper consideration of what they already believe. You mentioned X. What do you think that means for Y? Each question extends their thinking by one link in the chain. Over the course of conversation, those links add up. Step 4. Introduce your idea as an observation, not a proposal. I wonder if, and something that might be interesting to consider. And this might be completely off, but these are not weak qualifiers. They're disarming ones. They remove the ego threat of a direct proposal. The other person isn't being told something. They're encountering a thought that they now get to evaluate on their own terms. Step 5. Go quiet after planting. This is where most people fail. They plant the seed and then can't resist watering it immediately, adding more explanation, more justification, more pressure. Don't. Say the thing, and then let silence work. Silence creates space for the other person's mind to engage with what you just said. Fill that space too quickly, and you interrupt the very process you're trying to initiate. Step 6. When they arrive, let them arrive fully. If the technique works, there will be a moment when the other person presents your idea as their own, or as a conclusion they've reached independently. This moment requires one specific response from you: genuine enthusiasm for their thinking, not a knowing smile, not, yes, that's what I was getting at. Pure, uncomplicated affirmation of their insight. That's a really sharp observation. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. That's actually better. Let them own it completely. That ownership is the entire point. Warning: when someone is planting seeds in you, the most disorienting thing about this technique, when it's used skillfully, is that you genuinely cannot tell, in the moment, whether an idea is yours or theirs. And sometimes it doesn't matter. If the conclusion is good, if it serves you, if it's genuinely in your interest, the origin of the idea is irrelevant. Ideas don't have to be original to be right. But when the stakes are high, when a significant decision is being made, when something important hangs in the balance, it's worth pausing to ask, how did I arrive at this conclusion? What was the path? Trace it backwards. Who asked you the questions that led here? Whose framing shaped how you saw the options? Was there a conversation recently that seemed casual but consistently directed your attention in one particular direction? You're not looking for conspiracy. You're looking for influence, because influence, even well-intentioned influence, deserves to be examined before it becomes a major decision. The practice, before committing to any significant idea that emerged from a conversation with someone who stands to benefit from your decision. Give yourself 24 hours in a different environment. Think about alone. Talk to someone with no stake in the outcome. See if the idea still feels as obviously correct when it's not surrounded by the soil it was planted in. Sometimes it will. The seed grew into something genuinely good. And sometimes, in the new light, you'll see the shape of the hand that planted it. The most powerful ideas in history didn't spread because they were forced on people. They spread because someone, somewhere, ask the right question at the right moment, and let the human mind do what it does best. Complete the thought, claim the conclusion, carry it forward as its own. That's not manipulation. In its highest form, it's the art of meeting people where they are and trusting them to take the journey themselves. You just choose the road. Chapter 5. Dark Side Warning. When reverse psychology backfires and how to protect yourself. Everything in this book, up to this point, has been built on a quiet assumption that the person using these techniques has good intentions, that they want to communicate more effectively, lead more skillfully, navigate relationships with more grace. That the goal, beneath all the strategy, is something genuinely constructive for themselves and for the people around them. That assumption is worth examining, because the techniques you've learned in these pages are not inherently good or bad. They are, like most powerful things, entirely dependent on the hand that holds them. A scalpel in a surgeon's hand saves a life. The same scalpel in a different hand does something else entirely. This chapter is about both sides of that blade. When the technique becomes the problem, reverse psychology fails, sometimes spectacularly, for three distinct reasons. Understanding all three protects you both as a practitioner and as a potential target. The first reason, the other person sees it. None of these techniques are invisible to everyone. Intelligent, psychologically aware people recognize patterns. They've read books. They've been in enough conversations to know when someone is withdrawing strategically, agreeing too smoothly, or planting questions with suspicious precision. The moment someone recognizes the technique, the dynamic inverts completely. Now they're not responding to your influence. They're responding to the fact that you try to influence them. And that second response is almost always characterized by one thing: profound distrust. Trust, once damaged this way, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild, because the person now questions not just the specific interaction, but everything that preceded it. Was the agreement in the last conversation real? Were those questions genuine? What else was a technique? The relationships most worth having are almost always with people intelligent enough to eventually see through tactics, which means that building those relationships on tactics, rather than authentic understanding, is building on sand. The second reason, it works too well in the wrong direction. Reactance is a powerful force, but it's not a precision instrument. It's a blunt one. When you tell someone they probably can't do something, you're activating a drive that doesn't always go where you intended. Parents who use reverse psychology on teenagers report a version of this constantly. Tell a teenager they probably wouldn't be interested in studying, and some of them study. Others double down on not studying, specifically to maintain the narrative that they're making their own choices. The reactance fires, but in the direction of asserting independence rather than toward the behavior you wanted. Misjudge your audience. Misjudge the strength of their reactance, the direction of their resistance, the particular way they assert autonomy, and you can accelerate exactly the outcome you were trying to prevent. The third reason, it works and then corrodes. This is the most insidious failure mode. The technique succeeds. The person does what you wanted. The deal closes. The agreement is reached. The behavior changes. And then, over time, something shifts. People are remarkably good at sensing, retroactively, when they've been led somewhere. Not always consciously, but emotionally. A vague discomfort, a feeling that something about the interaction was slightly off. A mistrust they can't quite name. Relationships built primarily on influence tactics tend to develop a particular texture over time. They feel managed rather than mutual, controlled rather than connected. And the person on the receiving end, even without being able to articulate exactly why, begins to pull away. The short-term gain becomes a long-term loss. Every time, the line between influence and manipulation. Here's the question that matters most, and the one that's hardest to answer cleanly. When does influence become manipulation? Influence, at its core, is the act of affecting someone's thinking or behavior. Every conversation involves influence. Every carefully chosen word, every piece of framing, every question. These are all forms of influence. It is inescapable and not inherently wrong. Manipulation is something more specific, and the distinction lies not in the technique itself, but in two factors: transparency and benefit. Manipulation conceals its intent and serves primarily the manipulator. The other person, if they fully understood what was happening and why, would object, not to the outcome necessarily, but to the process. They were moved without their knowledge or consent. Influence, used with integrity, operates in a space where, even if the technique is never spelled out explicitly, the other person would not feel violated if they understood it. The goal serves them as well as you. The direction you're guiding them is genuinely good for them. This is not always a clean line. There are gray areas, genuine dilemmas, situations where your assessment of what's good for someone else may be wrong. Humility about this is not optional, but the orienting question is always the same. If this person could see exactly what I'm doing and why, would they feel respected or deceived? If the honest answer is deceived, stop. Reconsider. Find another way. Real life, when it goes wrong. Let me tell you about a different kind of story. One that doesn't end with a successful negotiation or a smoothly guided decision. A man, call him Daniel, had been in a relationship for 2 years. He was deeply conflict averse, and he discovered, almost by accident, that reverse psychology worked beautifully on his partner. When she resisted plans, he'd withdraw his enthusiasm and she'd come toward them. When he wanted her attention, he'd seem slightly distant and she'd move closer. When he wanted to make a decision, he'd frame it as not right for her and she'd argue him into it. It worked. For a while, it worked so well that Daniel stopped trying to communicate directly at all. Why have a difficult conversation when a carefully deployed technique accomplished the same thing? 2 years in, his partner sat across from him and said something that dismantled him completely. I don't know if anything between us has ever been real. I don't know if you've ever actually said what you meant. I feel like I've been in a relationship with a strategy. She wasn't wrong. Daniel had optimized for getting what he wanted in every moment, and in doing so had hollowed out the thing he actually wanted most: genuine connection, genuine intimacy, a relationship with a person rather than a dynamic he managed. The techniques didn't fail. They succeeded so completely that there was nothing left. Sign someone is using reverse psychology on you. Awareness is the first and most important form of protection. Here are the specific patterns to watch for. Sudden withdrawal of something you didn't realize you wanted. You weren't particularly interested in something, and then someone removed it from your reach, and now you can't stop thinking about it. Ask yourself, did your desire appear before or after the restriction? Agreement that feels unusually complete and arrives unusually quickly. Genuine empathy takes time. It sits with you. If someone agrees with everything you've said before you finish saying it, and pivots almost immediately to a new direction, the agreement may be a doorway rather than a destination. Questions that consistently point the same way. One insightful question is a gift. A series of questions that all, despite appearing varied, lead toward a single conclusion. That's navigation. Look at where the questions are taking you collectively, not just individually. Requests that start absurdly large. If someone opens with something clearly excessive and accepts your refusal with remarkable grace, wait before the next ask lands. The graciousness of accepting no is often the setup for a yes you'll find much harder to refuse. Being told you probably can't or wouldn't understand. Your ego is being invited to prove itself. Before accepting that invitation, ask, do I actually want this? Or do I just want to demonstrate that I can have it? How to build immunity. True immunity to psychological influence is neither possible nor, honestly, desirable. The same openness that makes you susceptible to manipulation also makes you capable of genuine connection, of being moved by meaningful things, of changing your mind when you encounter something worth changing it for. What you're building is not a wall. It's a slightly longer delay between stimulus and response. Practice the pause. Most influence techniques depend on momentum. They work best when you respond quickly, before the rational mind has time to engage. The single most effective defense against almost any form of psychological influence is simply to slow down. Let me think about that. I'll come back to you on this. I want to sit with that before I respond. These are complete sentences, and they are sufficient. Trace your desires backward. When you find yourself wanting something with sudden intensity, especially in the context of conversation or interaction, ask, when did I start wanting this? What was said or done immediately before this feeling appeared? Genuine desire has history. Manufactured desire has a trigger point. Make space for dissenting voices. Before significant decisions, actively seek out one person who has no stake in the outcome and no particular investment in what you decide. Their perspective won't be influenced by the same framing you've been living in. What do they see that you might have stopped seeing? Know your pressure points. Everyone has specific psychological triggers, places where reactance is strongest, where ego is most sensitive, where the need for autonomy, approval, or significance is most acute. The person who knows their own pressure points is significantly harder to manipulate through them. What makes you suddenly, irrationally want something? What makes you dig in regardless of logic? What makes you need to prove something? Know these things about yourself. They are the doors most likely to be found and used. Using this power responsibly. There's a version of this knowledge that makes people more calculating, more detached, more likely to see every interaction as a chessboard and every person as a piece to be moved. That version is available, and it is, in the long run, profoundly impoverishing. The alternative, the version worth choosing, is to use this understanding the way a skilled doctor uses knowledge of the body, not to exploit its vulnerabilities, but to work with its nature, to communicate more effectively because you understand how people actually process information, make decisions, and form beliefs, to lead more generously because you understand what people actually need in order to feel safe enough to follow, to negotiate more skillfully because you understand that the other person's resistance is not an obstacle to overcome, but a psychology to respect. The difference between a manipulator and a master communicator is not the techniques they know. It's what they're trying to accomplish. One is trying to extract something. The other is trying to build something, and understands that the most durable things are built with people, not on them. Everything in this book pointed toward one underlying truth. Human behavior is not random. It follows patterns, responds to specific conditions, moves in predictable directions when the right pressures are applied. That knowledge is power, significant power, and like all significant power, it asks something of the person who holds it. Not restraint exactly, not a decision to be less effective, less strategic, less skilled. Just honesty about what you want, why you want it, and whether the path you're taking to get it leaves the other person better or worse than you found them. That question, asked sincerely, answered honestly, is the only ethical framework you'll ever need. OUTRO, you now see what others can't. There's a moment that happens to everyone who genuinely absorbs this kind of knowledge. It arrives quietly, usually in the middle of an ordinary interaction, a conversation at work, a negotiation over something small, a moment in a relationship where someone withdraws just slightly or agrees just a little too readily or asks a question that points with suspicious consistency in a single direction. And you see it, not with suspicion, not with paranoia, just with a calm, clear recognition. There's a structure here. Someone is moving something. That moment, the first time it happens with real clarity, changes things permanently. You cannot go back to not seeing it. The invisible becomes visible. The automatic becomes conscious. And consciousness, as this entire book has argued, is where genuine choice begins. That is what you now have. A choice that most people never get to make, because most people never realize there was anything to choose. What you've actually learned. On the surface, these 5 chapters were about tactics, the forbidden fruit effect, strategic agreement, the reverse ask, planting seeds, the warnings, the defenses, the ethical lines. But underneath all of that, something more fundamental was being built, a new way of reading people. You now understand that when someone suddenly resists, they're not being difficult. They're experiencing reactance, and the worst thing you can do is push harder. You understand that an argument is almost never about facts, and that the fastest path to changing someone's mind runs directly through their feeling of being understood. You understand that the most powerful requests often aren't requests at all, and that the most influential ideas are the ones people discover rather than receive. These aren't tricks, they're translations. You now speak a language that describes human behavior more accurately than the one most people use, which means you can navigate it more skillfully, more compassionately, and with far less wasted energy. The mindset shift that changes everything. Here is the single biggest change that separates people who understand psychology from people who merely know about it. They stop trying to change people and start trying to understand them. This sounds passive. It is the opposite of passive. Understanding someone deeply enough to know what they actually need, not what they're saying they want, not what their surface behavior suggests, but the underlying drive, the real motivation, the genuine fear or desire beneath the words. That is one of the most demanding and most rewarding skills a human being can develop. And when you have it, influence stops being something you do to people. It becomes something that happens between you. A final word on power. Power, in the wrong framing, is a zero-sum game. One person has more, another has less. One person wins, another yields. Every interaction becomes a competition. Every relationship a negotiation for position. That framing is seductive. It is also, over time, deeply exhausting and deeply lonely. The people who use these principles most effectively, the ones who seem to move through the world with unusual ease, who lead without demanding, who persuade without pressuring, who get what they need while leaving others genuinely better for the interaction. They've understood something different. That real influence is not extraction. It's alignment. Finding the place where what you need and what the other person is capable of giving actually meet, and being skilled enough, patient enough, perceptive enough, honest enough to create the conditions for that meeting to happen naturally. That's not manipulation. That's mastery. And mastery, unlike manipulation, compounds. Every relationship it touches becomes stronger. Every person it encounters walks away with something. The power doesn't diminish with use. It grows. You now see what others can't. Use it well.